Welcome to Tales of Hope, where every paw print counts. 𝗏𝗡𝗃 in the house, spreading love, hear the sound. Every week animal stories, rights and welfare in the mix. Step up, take action, we're giving animals a fix. Tales of Hope, raise your voice, make some noise. Change the game for every animal, girl and boy. One world, one fight, let's turn the page. A future for the voiceless, bring hope to center stage.
How can the insights from human-animal studies and your work on cultural attitudes be woven into the frameworks of education, media, and leadership to inspire systematic change?
Okay, well, I guess what I respond to that is to remind folks that in the current moment in world history, we're confronted with climate change.
Yes.
Tremendous challenge to the way in which we have developed human civilization, pushing back against the sea, pushing the agriculture all halfway up the mountain. And the other thing that is occurring is what's called the Anthropocene, which is a term that is being applied, at least informally for the moment, to the whole geological period that we live in. So instead of the Holocene or whatever the other scenes were called, we now have the Anthropocene, which refers to the possibility that the primary shaper of the world in its physical sense as well as in its life sense is through our impact. Human impact, Anthropocene. So those are opportunities for human-animal studies to contribute to that. And I don't see much more to say about that, but it just seems like, instead of the narrow appeal to the animal lovers, we can now appeal to all of those who are interested in the environment more generally, and to those who are interested in sustaining the way in which humans have been living in this world. I mean, for example, do you build up, stone walls to prevent the increasing waters expanding, or do you move back and let those areas return to what they at once were, which is swamps and places where the birthplace of animals occurred? I think that we're in sync with a number of major forces that are confronting us in the world, and good luck to us, huh? I think the systemic changes might come. I mean, we see now that they're just meeting now in Brazil to discuss what to do about climate change. My dear country, United States, of course, has other more important things to do, like expanding the ballroom in the White House. So. Anyway, I think if the question of hope that we will be talking about, I think there's hope in that we will move to more sustainable agriculture, that we will move to things like less reliance on intensive farming of animals. There's technological fixes to that we can talk about in terms of cultured meat. So forth. So I think that the technology will play an important role in it, and the current challenges will be, we will be simpatico with those and seen as contributing to their solution.
Absolutely. Now, from your lifetime of work in animal advocacy, what has been the hardest truth to accept, and what gives you most hope for humanity's moral evolution?
Yes, that's a question and a half. So the hardest truth to accept, I thought about this quite a bit, and I was a clinical psychologist, and I did a lot of work with individuals who were struggling with problems and stuff. And I think the hardest thing for me to accept is the self-centeredness of humans. The term narcissism, for example. We're a species where, on the positive side, every individual is highly valued. But the basis of that value is the psychology that says, my self-interest is the primary interest. So that can work politically. You have the interest groups that growing together with common self-interest and so forth, and it works pretty well. But on the other hand, when faced with change, for example, the change in how we would view animals, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? How's it help me put bread on the table? How's it help me get my kid to school? How's it help with my being recognized as an important individual? All that stuff. So I think that's the hardest truth to accept. And what gives you the most hope for humanity's moral evolution? Wow. When you gave me that question, the quote came back to me. I had to look it up, of course, but Martin Luther King, quote, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." Martin Luther King. I'm ambivalent about that reading of history. Certainly, the 20th century was no bargain. In the West, we had unbelievable wars, and in the East, there were mass-induced starvations, and I mean the scope of the suffering expanded dramatically just in terms of numbers. So it's hard to sustain for me, and I'm ambivalent about it, a progressive view of history. I'm just not sure about that. We have, the threats of the nuclear bomb, which we've lived with for a long time. We have increased internation strife. We have tremendous inequality in terms of the haves and have-nots. On the other hand, and I am ambivalent, so I'll give you the other hand. On the other hand, historically, we can see an expanding circle of compassion. In the United States, I'm an American historian. That was what I studied as an undergraduate, so I come from there. But in the United States, we began with the notion that only propertied white men could vote. And then slowly we moved, well, you don't have to have property. Well, maybe you don't have to be white. And then maybe you don't have to be a man. And so then we moved to, well, maybe animals are important. Maybe the environment is important. So the expanding, so that's there. Who knows? At my age, I'm happy to leave it to the next generation.
Well, it's, human, we all live on hope that maybe, at the end of the as they say, we hope at the end of the tunnel, we can see the light. And that's what keeps us going, sort of thing.
Yes.
But yes, humans have evolved, but I think we still have a long way to go. The journey is still long.
Yes.
Now, you witness the pain of animals and the fatigue of advocates. How have you personally stayed centered through decades of confronting systemic suffering?
If what I am is called centered, I'd hate to see decentered. But anyway, seriously, it's a struggle. And just personally, there was a period when I was into this thing for maybe 10 or 15 years where I very strongly felt, and it was pointed out to me by a colleague, you're burning out. You know what burning out means? It means that you have a level of irritability You have a lack of patience. You're having trouble in the morning getting up and doing your work. So burnout is an occupational hazard of being an advocate for a cause which is, for most people, marginal and peripheral to what's really going on in the world. So there's very little validation of it. You're pushing back against the mainstream, and you're just a very, very small eddy in that stream. So and then there's another thing called compassion fatigue. And that's another occupational hazard. And it's closely related to burnout, but a little bit different. So the prime example of that is a couple of examples. One is the shelter worker, the animal shelter worker, who is faced with an overload of animals and animals that they can't find a home for, and is euthanizing animals. And it's just a very, very difficult, here I am, my work is to help animals, and I'm killing this dog. Tremendous psychological dilemma. And it wears on you. And eventually, you just have a lot of, you can't deal with it anymore. So compassion fatigue. Another example, by the way, is veterinary medicine. At least in the West, it's somewhat considered second status to human medicine. And again, those folks are burdened with not only that secondary status, which is not deserved, not justified. They also have to deal with people coming in and saying, look, we're moving from New York to Arizona. We can't take the dog. What can we do with the dog? We tried to put him in this, we tried to do that. And anyway, there's unjustifiable reasons for euthanasia that the veterinarian has to contend with. And the suicide rate in veterinary medicine is very high. So one of the things that's been developed recently, last 10 or 15 years, particularly at the University of Tennessee, is a subfield of social work, which is called veterinary social work. And these folks join with the veterinary schools, social work school and the veterinary school, and they try to help veterinary students deal with some of these problems, the problem of euthanasia, the problem of compassion fatigue, the problem of how to deal with people who are grieving over their animal and stuff like that, and their own grief. So there's an attempt to deal with that problem. So let me just look at the question again, see if I've addressed it. So one of the things that I developed as a strategy to stay centered it's a funny mix, but in one way, I keep my head down. Okay, I'm working on this little issue here and this little project, and I'm just going to stay there, and I'm not looking. Okay, and that protects me from the pervasive suffering that's going on. On the other hand, I occasionally will pull back and look at the big picture, but I look at the big picture in a very long-term future way. And I talk to myself about the circle of compassion expanding. I talk to myself about these technological advances that might help us reduce the need to kill all these animals for food, etc. So I take a peek at that, and then I come back. So it's a kind of building. Part of it is building a wall that you don't really want, but the wall is to protect you from when you walk down the street as an animal advocate. You see animal suffering. Whether you look in the fur coats, or you're looking at in the medicine cabinet, or you're looking at wherever you're looking, you're seeing that animals are not getting a good shot at a good life. And if you keep reacting to that, it's very, very tough to stay centered. So there's a kind of suppression. Anyway, a very complicated kind of psychology develops around how to keep yourself. And at one point, I did take a break around the burnout issue. And I went to England for 6 months, and I taught some other thing, and I kept the animal thing to the side for 6 months. And then I came back. And then, as I mentioned before, my shift from focusing on the animal research issue to this wonderful new field, that helped me a lot also. So I have struggled with it. I remember now also in the early years when I was doing the anti-vivisection stuff, looking at some videos that were produced that showed animal suffering, and I was traumatized by it. So there's a kind of vicarious secondary traumatization, there's a big word for you, that occurs.
Absolutely.
You're dealing with these losses that are, aren't quite directly yours, but keep impacting on you. How do you keep dealing with that? Anyway?
Now, I'll be honest. You mentioned a very good thing, that you put your head down, concentrate on that little project, and, like putting a blinders, like how
Yes.
you put the blinders on the horse so that he
Yeah.
doesn't look left and right. I think I need to start implementing that into myself. Even I'll have to start working, because yes, to be honest, at times it becomes very difficult, and I don't want to boast about it, but yes, I have been facing a lot of hostilities and a lot of times, it comes back and you start thinking and you start wondering why we humans are doing things like that. You won't believe it. I don't know whether I should say that. You won't believe it. My 85-year-old mother was threatened because I take care of the community animals, and it sometimes, it's like it pushes you back even. But I think it's the spiritual side of me that keeps me helps me retain my sanity, sort of thing, that you need to keep, get up. If not you, who will take care of these kids? It's like, it's a daily struggle for me, but I think it's something that was a calling that happened from above, and I'm just trying to do my part and my bit, what I can, rather than trying to say to myself, I need to save all of them. But what I think, me and my wife, she's also been a great support for me. We've come to this, that let's take one at a time, just let's restrict ourselves to what our pockets can afford, rather than trying to be doing, the whole thing. Just keep to our limits. Let's give them a good life, good food, good doctors, good medicine. Of the 3 that we take care of home and the 6 that I have out here, I mean, I know people would talk about it. We're taking care of 200, 300, and 400 animals. But at the end of the day, we also have to be realistic what our pockets can afford. So I think I have come to terms with that this is what I can afford, even though it does put a dent into our pockets, but that's what we stick to, sort of thing. At least, these animals, what we take care of, are getting a life that they should be. At least we're trying to do that a little bit, sort of thing.
Great. And if everybody did that, would be great. I just want to mention one other sort of challenge to emotional resilience that's associated with being an animal advocate. There's interpersonal cost. So the animal advocates all have their Thanksgiving Day story. So Thanksgiving in the United States is a day, as it suggests, when we give thanks to this wonderful democracy that we used to live in, that we live in. And so I would, me and my wife and my son, we would meet with other members of the extended family, my brother and his family, and so forth. And we would meet, and they'd put the turkey in the center of the thing. And so one day I said, I'd really prefer if you didn't bring the turkey in, you'd carve the turkey over there instead. Okay. Then the next year I said, I really would prefer it if there was an alternative to eating the turkey. Okay, all right, fine. Then the next year I said, I can't deal with this turkey business. I'm out. And that has an interpersonal. I mean, that's just a metaphor for that people invite us to dinner, and I don't know what to feed you, Kenny. What I don't know what to make. My mother used to say that. I don't know what to feed you. You don't eat anything. What do you eat? You don't eat anything. Stuff like that. So there's interpersonal cost, and the compensating factor, though, for that loss and the challenges it presents as you try to figure out how to present yourself in ways that both maintain your integrity and your causes, at the same time respect them to some extent, but push them a little bit. Anyway, so the countervailing factor is that the animal advocacy provided me with a community of like-minded people. They weren't living next door, but thanks to all the technology and everything, I felt that my community was this wonderful group of people who had realized the suffering and were trying to do something about it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a very important way of sustaining the emotional resilience.
Absolutely. Now, activism often begins with anger. How can that emotion mature into compassionate, nonviolent action rooted in awareness rather than opposition?
Well, that's a nice assertion. Activism often begins with anger. I think it does begin with anger. It begins with other emotions as well, which to some extent are related to anger: frustration, disappointment, depression. There was a book written way back by one of the early animal advocates called Love and Anger. And he tried to present the thesis that the anger was not inconsistent with love, and that you could use that as a kind of motivator and stuff like that. So I'm not dismissive of the anger and the frustration, disappointment. I think they can be sublimated, used as a motivating force. On the other hand, they're dangerous because the anger can very easily become a kind of self-righteousness, indignation. How could you do that to those animals? What's the matter with you? You have no moral fiber, all kinds of hatred. So I think more than anger is a problem. The hatred, dealing with the hatred, the negative feelings you have toward these folks who are doing this, and trying to accept that and trying to work with them. That to me is a big challenge. How not to get resentful, how not to feel overwhelmed by the scope of this thing and the many different forms it takes. And as I mentioned, the suffering is pervasive. You just open your medicine cabinet, you look at the food ingredients that you're eating. I developed this notion on a paper about the psychology of animal advocates, and I called it the caring sleuth. So the sleuth refers to the fact that much of the suffering has become invisible. They move the slaughterhouse from the center of the city to the outskirts. The laboratories where they're doing the animal research have absolutely no label on them whatsoever. And the pharmaceutical research, and so it's to some extent, you have to root it out. You have to be a detective to find it. You have to move past all the animal welfare stuff that the corporations claim they have, what they don't really have. At the same time, you have to maintain your caring. You can't fall back into a hating, indignant, vegan police. We had the notion of the vegan police. So anyway, that's my response to your anger quote. Let me just read it again and see if I've responded. Activism often begins with anger. How can that emotion mature into compassionate, nonviolent action rooted in awareness rather than opposition? I would say with difficulty.
You just hit the nail, and you've really presented.
It's a challenge.
The way the perspective that you've given to it is such a beautiful and such a fact that I think we all need to listen and understand and see how we can implement it, into ourselves.
Yep.
Now,
it takes some emotional work.
Absolutely. It does.
Yeah.
It does.
Yes.
Now, what inner practices or reflections sustain your purpose when change feels painfully slow?
Whew.
Tough one.
So, I've been practicing meditation for many, many years. And I'm not very successful at it. I know you're not supposed to talk about success, you just meditate. But anyway, I do that. It helps me to center to the degree that I center. It helps me to recognize what's bugging me and what's not bugging me, what I can do something about and what I can't. It helps me to clear my mind a little bit. So I find that very helpful. But that's just a minor practice. I would say that what sustains me is what I call a transcendent belief. That's a term that I use to cover religious faith, spiritual faith, etc. So my faith, my transcendent belief, is that I am a very fortunate individual to have found a cause in my life that I feel passionately about, that can call on some of the skills that I actually have, and I'm very, very grateful that I was able to find that meaning and purpose in my life. And finding that and then working in it, it sustains me. And obviously, it wouldn't continue to exist if I didn't have some hope that, all the challenges and all the century that it's going to, it took the United States a century to move past, to some extent, the racial issue. A century. Yes. Before that, we had 200 years of slavery. So I'm not looking for tomorrow. I'm looking way ahead. And so maintaining that hope and that belief is itself sustaining for me. So I'd like to try to describe this faith that I've just referred to a little bit more. And it's a critique of religion, not spirituality. And it's the notion that in some ways the God distracts, or can distract, does distract from the immediate moment. So you look at the animal and you think, God created it. Well, okay, but it's the animal. It's the animal, stupid. So life is all. It's the be all and end all. The problem is how to live a good life. If you need a God to do that, okay, I don't want a God for that. I don't believe in that. To me, what's critical is the recognition and the continuing affirmation of the awe and wonder that when I look at that tree, just the tree, my front yard, unbelievable. This tree, 150 years old, 90 feet tall, lives on and on and on and on, and it's marvelous. So the tree and the bird, and also my wife, I have awe and wonder that these things exist. That this is I'm going very purple here. It's a very, very beautiful planet. I mean, it really is the clouds and the movement of the clouds and the rains I mean, it's quite amazing. And also the imponderables, which I don't then ascribe to God. So an imponderable is, for example, why is there something rather than nothing? How is it that life began? These chemicals became living. How is it that those living forms, some of them, many of them, are aware of the world? Incredible. How is it that I can be aware, if incompletely, of what you, Anil, is thinking and feeling right now? So these imponderables, in the sense that they really can't be answered by science.
Absolutely.
And so that requires a faith. My faith is that those things came into existence. I don't need an agent. I'm happy with the natural descriptions to the degree that they tell us about it. So again, just to wrap up, for me, a personified God is a distraction from the here and now. And one other thing, death. Death is not a meeting. It's not a new place. It's a departing. Say goodbye.
That's an absolutely beautiful thought, the way you put it. And to be honest, thoughts like this can only align with people who are evolving or enlightened. Not every human being would think like this. So it's such a beautiful, beautiful way of putting life up. Now, moving forward, if animals were recognized as moral or legal persons in the next 50 years, how might that reshape our civilization's moral architecture?
You ask big questions, I'll tell you. So let me look at the legal persons thing. I talked about that a little bit.
Yes.
Under the law. Yeah. So I won't go back to that. But let's look at the moral person. So in the Western philosophical tradition, we have Aristotle, who developed this hierarchy of valued lives. At the top, he put God, the angels, and then men. And then beneath that, he put women and other kinds of brutes and creatures. And that chain of being was very, very influential in Western civilization. And then we had Descartes, who began to say that animals were simply automatons, kind of, that they weren't feeling beings and so on. And then even with Kant, we have the notion that animals aren't fully agents, that they're only means. They don't have ends that they can work toward. And anyway, an inferior position describing animals so that he could make humans on the top. And then in current day, we have philosophers like Tom Reagan and Peter Singer and a whole other generation of philosophers who are trying to argue that we need to push back against those diminishments of animal being and talk about the rights of animals and the moral, that they are obligatory objects of moral consideration. They're part of the moral community, all that stuff. So that's happening to some extent. How might that reshape our civilization's moral architecture? It might lead to the Earth surviving in terms of its life forms. If it doesn't, I think we may be one of the first to go.
Absolutely. Such a beautiful way to put it. Now, as AI, ecology, and philosophy converge, could emerging technologies help expand cultural empathy rather than diminish it?
Yeah, so I mentioned this a little bit, but technology. I'll just mention again, cultured meat. I don't know if you folks, you're familiar with it. Well, you're familiar with everything, but in terms of your audience, cultured meat is producing meat that is chemically the same as meat. You take a muscle cell from an animal and you put it in a petri dish or whatever, and you grow it in scale, and it's chicken, it's pork, whatever it is, and that is happening worldwide. And in addition, plant-based protein is becoming somewhat popular. Soy and wheat gluten and pea protein and so forth, replacing the need for animal protein. Because animal protein, even if it's in cultured meat, is not that good for you. There's clear health issues there, as well as all the environmental issues, which are huge. It's important, people may not recognize this, but the current mode of production of meats, animal protein, is highly deleterious to wildlife, because we confine these animals in limited spaces, but to feed them, we are using a very high percentage of the arable land in the world. So you think, well, people are eating the soybeans. No, people are not eating the soybeans. The cows and the chickens and the goats and the pigs are eating the soybeans and the cornmeal. Most of that goes to them, not to us. So it's a very, very inefficient way of producing protein. You lose an order of magnitude of 10 just to go, instead of eating the cow, you eat the soybean directly. You save in terms of efficiency of protein, and you don't have to use the arable land, and the wildlife survives more. So we have learned in the last 50 years that the reduction in the numbers of wildlife is huge. It's like, I think the figures are something like in the last 40 years, 60% of wildlife populations have gone down 60%. So that's aside from the extinction issue. It's not just the extinction issue. It's the fact that these animal populations are vestigial. I mean, the buffalo in the United States, there used to be X million of them in the East as well as in the West. Now, we might have 50,000 of them or something. And so all these numbers, the tigers, way, way down. All these animals are way, way down. Another way of measuring this is to measure what's called the biological mass, actually weigh the animals. And if you weigh the animals, the wildlife now is only 4% of the biological mass of life, of vertebrates I'm talking about. So if you look at vertebrates, the humans and the 50 billion chicken and the 1 billion cows and the 1 billion pigs, they constitute like 90% of the biomass in the world, instead of it being somewhat equalized. So eating meat is a tremendous issue, A very, very important issue. So that's technology. So your question says, as AI, ecology, and philosophy converge, could emerging technologies help expand? The answer is yes.
Wonderful. I guess we will learn over time. Now, can you envision societies consciously designed for all species to thrive? And what cultural awakening would that require from all of us?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's where I want you to come into the discussion more directly. I mean, I've sort of put out my views of that. The primary issue being human superiority, and my view that we need to fight that with all different kinds of armaments along a spectrum. I just don't know. The economics is such a driving force in the world. It's huge. The environmental degradation is huge. Cultural awakening, I think that is the answer. How quite we get there, I don't know. Why don't you give me your thoughts on that? I'm coming to near the end of our time, I believe. So
yes, absolutely.
Why don't you talk up to that a little bit?
Well, for me, I'll be honest. I mean, I'll look at it from the Eastern perspective, and
Yes.
from a spiritual. Yeah,
that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah. Even though, let's be very honest, you rightly said the economics play a very important part today. Even in India, it has become a factor where, it's a gamut of whole things, like what's in it for me, how am I going to gain financially, and the economics of the whole thing has become a way of life for a certain handful of people, especially the top-notch, the 2% or the 3%. For them, it really doesn't bother them whether they are killing life, to just make more money. But coming back to the cultural aspect, I'll be very honest. This is going to be my personal opinion and a very blatant one. As a country with a rich heritage, and what we talk about, the Sanatan Dharma or the Hinduism, we have lost our way, to be honest, as humans. And it is, I'll also partly blame it on certain stakeholders that are there, the politicians, for their benefit, what they are doing. For the very simple reason, animals don't vote, and they're not voting, so it doesn't benefit them. Let's be very honest. And then, as we were talking about the economics of all that is involved in here, and it's big money. Let's be very honest. I mean, as I mentioned to you earlier, that India is the second largest exporter of beef meat. So we've had a cultural degradation, to be honest. Honestly, this is my personal opinion, whatever it is for the viewers, or, I don't want to be politically correct, but I think our culture has been the very fabric, the moral fabric of our culture and I'm not talking religion out here, I'm talking about the way of life. Hinduism is a way of life. Even what they talk about, Sanatan Dharma or whatever, it's a way of life. It encompasses the way you present yourself to the world, how you treat your fellow human beings, how you treat the environment around you, how you treat the animals, even without expecting anything in return from them. That is the most important aspect.
Yeah.
But I'll be very honest, in the last 15 to 20 years, coming back, since I've come back to India 20 years back now, after staying across all Far East and all these places that I've traveled, I've realized, to be honest, we've just gone way down, way down. Sorry, this is my personal opinion, but this is the way. I'm not being egocentric or something like that, but this is just the way I have been seeing. Even though we have we have spiritual leaders who talk about a lot of things, we know we have so much of historic material that is available for us, which actually tells us the way of life. Or even, as I said, Hinduism, it's not a religion, it's a way of life, the way you have to lead. But because it has been fabricated over the period of time for certain peoples to benefit, I don't want to say this, but I will come out blatantly. Look at it. We've had today temples in this country where there is a huge amount of donations that go into them. It's into billions. But let's look at it. Do they give back to the community? No, they don't. Forget about giving back to the community, even though, we know that. Let's take a simple example. Lord Shiva, one of the Indian deities, happens to have a companion dog, but you will see outside the temples dogs are not treated well by the other humans. So are we really following, not even following, are we even trying to adhere to the way of life that has been written down in our scriptures, in our books, which is supposed to be there? But certain stakeholders, for their benefit, they have morally corrupted what it is actually supposed to be. So this is my way of how I see, because I see, I'm not, trying to be egocentric, or I normally don't use so much of I, but this is the way, I see what's happening around me and around the world. And at the end of the day, I just say, because everybody has to deal with their own karma. So I believe, or personally with the spirituality foundation that I have, at the end of the day, if they are doing it, it's their karma. They will have to reap their karma. And there is, to be honest, with the spirituality, there's no hell or heaven. Everything is down here. So,
well, you've complimented me on my presentation. I have to compliment you. That was very well put and really clarifies for me a situation that's going on in India. I wanted to mention to you in that I know that we both hold on to what you call the trails of hope, but hope. There's a novelist currently living in the United States. And I don't know if you've heard of him. His name is Ocean Vuong, Vuong.
Okay.
And he teaches literature at one of the universities in the United States. He's South Vietnamese by birth. And he has a novel called On Earth, We're Briefly Courageous. And one of the things that we haven't emphasized much is that one of his, he's Buddhist light, if you will. So he talks about letting go of his ego and simply describing the lives of working class people in Hartford, Connecticut, where he was brought up, and just staying with them and accepting that they don't really have any way out that they're not part of the rags to riches. They're not part of the American story of success. They're just what they are, and that they have kindness toward each other. And anyway, I recommend him to you, maybe, and to your readers.
I will definitely take a look at the book. I will definitely order a copy of it.
Yeah, and take a look of his. He gives a couple of talks that are on YouTube, and that's where he talks about his own life. And the book is semi-autobiographical. I mean, he was brought up in this working class setting, and his parents were illiterate and everything, and he became this incredibly great writer. Anyway, and so I mean, his story is rags to riches, but he denies that should be the main storyline for most of us. So very, very, very well done. And again, pushing back against the egocentricity of certainly Western culture, and is what you're describing, the degradation of Eastern culture towards something materialistic as well.
Absolutely. Now, do you view coexistence with animal as an ethical obligation or a spiritual evolution in humanity's collective consciousness?
Okay, I'm running out of gas, I have to tell you, but I'll just say briefly, for me, neither ethics nor spiritual evolution are sufficient. They may be necessary, but the cultural change that we've been talking about is going to be a function of those things, as well as changes in technology, which we've discussed, and changes, frankly, in the economic framework that we currently live in, where more is better, and the important thing is to get as much money as you can and stuff like that. So that's all I would say with that. As I say, I think I've said my piece.
Absolutely. Now, what would it take emotionally, historically, and philosophically to move from human dominance to genuine interspecies harmony?
I'm sorry for laughing. It would take many more Anils to get there.
Well, thank you so much for that compliment. Now, coming to the last question is, if you could whisper one message into the conscience of future generations about animal, what would it be?
Shared space. The acknowledgement and understanding and acceptance that we all share this incredible planet, and that we all influence its future, and that we all deserve a fulfilling part in living here, but that requires that it's not just us, it's them also, and that there's no them, it's all us.
It's a we. Let's take it as it's all we sort of thing.
All we. Okay. Yeah.
Now, I come to the last section where I leave it as an open mic for the guest to talk about a favorite, a movement or a fundraise or something, a pet project that is closer to their heart for the audience that you would like to make an appeal to, sort of thing.
A project that I'm involved in, or that I would like to see happen?
Or would you? That depends how you want to see it. Even if what you would love to see it take a shape.
Yeah. So I mean, very personally, my first love in the animal issue was wildlife. I was brought up when the environmental movement was just getting going. And within that, I have very, very strong feelings for wolves. And the crisis of their reintroduction and the back and forth on that is very, very trying for me. So I wish that there were projects and causes that could turn that back around. On a much more personal note, I spent the last 40 years or so trying to help animals, if you will, on paper. And in my retiring years now, I have a project that I've developed that is on the ground rather than on the paper. And it involves building and installing and monitoring nest boxes for bluebirds.
Wow.
And so I live in a very small community that's fairly forested, wooded, and I have put up about 20 nest boxes. And I've been doing this for 8 years. And we now have 50 or 60 bluebird chicks coming forth every year. So that's a very concrete way in which I can be part of human-animal relationships, and not so much just on paper.
That's such a beautiful way. Kenneth, Dr. Shapiro, thank you so much for taking the time from your busy schedule to be on this show with me. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
My pleasure, and it's a great pleasure meeting you. And again, thank you so much for your work and your spirituality.
Thank you so much. Now,